Good evening, everyone. I am Randy Williams, Vice President and Associate Provost for Inclusive Excellence and Associate Professor of Education at Elon University. Welcome to this evening's program. We're tonight gathered to celebrate the legacy and life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Today, we have a very special guest with us in Ms. Deena Hayes-Greene, the co-founder and managing director of the Racial Equity Institute located in Greensboro, North Carolina. I'm also joined with my close colleague, Dr. Stephanie Baker, the Assistant Professor of Public Health Studies here at Elon University. We are going to enter this. We're all in a different space these days in this day and age with the COVID situation. So we're in this virtual space, but we're also different tonight in this particular program. In the sense that our featured guest, Deena, has asked that I not give a scripted introduction of herself. And so I'm refraining from doing that. And you will get to know her as the conversation ensues and continues throughout this evening. So we've had conversation about that. But I would be remiss if I did not share a little bit about Deena Hayes-Greene. I've known her for 5 years now, and I first met her at my first attendance at a Racial Equity Institute Phase 1 workshop. And at this workshop 5 years ago, I was really fascinated by the content and the delivery of information at this particular workshop on racial equity as this organization shared its racial analysis. It was very phenomenal for me to see the information packaged in such a way. And from that point, I've attended several of that very same workshops and other programs offered by REI. And so we're fortunate now to have this close by neighbor to join us this evening for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. celebration, a series long of events that will occur throughout this period of time. This particular program tonight is sponsored by the Office of Cultural Programs. So to my guests, Deena, welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. Thank you for inviting me. So nice to be here. And I'm just glad to be a part of the education and organizing that you've been leading as my neighbor here in North Carolina.
Great, we're great. Well, it's certainly a team effort. As you know and learn more about Elon, we are all hands on deck. And so it's a collective effort. And I know you know about organizing and how it takes many stakeholders in any process to bring about real change. So Dr. Baker, good evening to you as well.
Good evening. Good evening. Thanks for inviting me into the space.
We're glad to have you, Dr. Baker. And I know we're going to have this really enriching conversation. Another added feature about this is Stephanie and Deena are good friends as well. And so they'll be able to have this conversation. I'll try to keep up with them as we discuss the legacy and life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Thanks so much. I want to start just by saying that when I started at Elon, I really wanted to bring the analysis to more folks there. And so I met Randy, I think we started actually the same year. And I had just been to a phase 2 workshop, and we were talking about the importance of institutional organizing and how we need to get people in institutions at the table. So I asked Randy to go to the training, but I was prepared for resistance because I had heard so many stories from the other organizers about how many times they had to request for people to come to the workshop, and I told Randy about it, and I went back for a follow-up meeting preparing with all these tools of how I'm going to convince him to go. And he was like, oh, I've already registered. Let me see on my calendar. It's for such and such date. And so I just was so excited to have a colleague who was willing to engage in this work. And so Deena, I would love for you to start out by sharing your own story into this work. How did you get started? Where did you move from, and how did you get into where you are now?
Thanks, Dr. Baker. And that's what I call my friend, Stephanie. I'm so proud of all that she and Dr. Williams have accomplished. And so I just always want to elevate their hard work and how they're representing our community. And, Stephanie and I, Dr. Baker and I are good friends because we say anti-racism is a way of life. It's who you are, it's what you do, it's who you hang around with. And so we met in this work and we connected in this work and we became family in this work. And so I'm so honored to be here. So I got into this work I'm the accidental organizer because I was invited to attend an Undoing Racism workshop back in the late 90s that was being put on by the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. They're one of the longest running anti-racist organizations in the country, stationed and headquartered in New Orleans, Louisiana. And I declined, Nettie Code, we called her Mama Nettie. She was one of the elders in our community. She was a real activist, advocate, leader, in the 90s, dealing with housing and public safety and blighted homes and just all of those kinds of things. And so I was a human relations commissioner for our city, and Nettie had done so much organizing. She had community and housing development. They were going to the workshop. The mayors were going to the workshop. The police chief was going to the workshop. So when I became a human relations commissioner, she said, well, you need to go to the workshop. We've gotten all the other commissioners through. And I was like, oh, no, I'm Black. I'm Black. And I was an African-American studies major. So check. Right. And so, and I'm a human relations commissioner, right? So I'm bringing together people across lines of differences. So I'm like, I know plenty of people that need to take my seat in that workshop. But Nettie was like, you need to go. So I still, was just holding back because I was just doing the work. I was involved in a project. Woolworth announced they were closing their retail stores in the 90s. And one of the stores, on the list was the store in Greensboro. The bank owned the building. They were going to demolish the building and turn it into a parking lot because the bank had built, new offices. And so two civil rights leaders, county commissioner and city councilman at the time, were just like, no, that's the site of the 1960 sit-ins. We have to preserve that facility, that history, that legacy. And so I joined them, and it's what we call the sit-in movement at the time. We just started a nonprofit organization, fought the bank to get them to sell us the building because they just weren't going to do it right away. And so I was doing that kind of stuff. I mean, it's just, I'm doing it. I get this, right? And so, but Nettie was relentless. She was just like, you need to go. So I finally went to get her off my back. And, it changed my life. It changed my life. I knew some stuff, I read some books and I listened to some people, and I took a lot of courses, and I'm Black, and so I have some experience. I just got to keep saying that because that's what we say. It's just like, I'm Black. I know this, right? That was just such a foolish thing to say at the time. After that experience, it's something that I brought into the Racial Equity Institute is we say that an organized lie is more powerful and more dangerous than a disorganized truth. And what I learned in that Undoing Racism workshop was the way that the truth had been organized, that made things so clear, that answered questions I didn't even know I had. And I feel today that after 20 years, I feel like I know less today than I did when I thought I knew so much. And so I'm so grateful to Nettie, and I will just never say that again. So I'm a lifelong learner in this analysis.
Yeah,
Thank you for that, Deena. So talk a little bit more about this idea of organizing. I think for some people, they're not quite sure what it means. What does it mean to be an organizer? I know that everybody who works for REI is an organizer first, right? So share a little bit more about what that means.
Yeah, when I introduced the Racial Equity Institute, which we started in 2008, just to localize the anti-racism work that had been going on for 20 years in Greensboro. And so we're people, I started organizing people. I went up to my first trainers and I said, when are you coming back? I wanted to go again. I want to bring my mom. I wanted to bring my colleagues. I had been elected to the school board. I'm chair of the school board in Guilford County. I've been on the school board for almost 20 years. So I'm just like, they need to come because everybody's just all confused about this race thing is. We've been talking about the wrong things. And so they said, whenever you organize it. So I thought, well, how do you do that? So, I just started, I had to figure out how to convey this analysis in ways that reach people where they were. We say that in education all the time. We got to meet students where they are. We have to meet people where they are in their analysis and understanding of race. And that's what the workshop did for me. It just met me where I was. And so I started organizing workshops. I started organizing teachers and police officers and social workers and community leaders and people that ran nonprofit organizations and people from the city and the county. And, you organize, you get the number of people you need in a workshop, you raise the money, you go get the food, you pick the trainers up from the airport. And because organizing is that collective capacity building of people, of a base of people that is working with a shared understanding of what the problem is. I was so stunned. I just took for granted, because we have such a lack of respect for race in this country, that we don't first agree on what it is. And I just didn't even do that. I just thought, I know what race is. She knows what race is. We talk about it all the time. And then I was just like, no, that's maybe a manifestation of it, but that's not what it is. I just gave out so much misinformation, when I was just talking about race. I feel like I'm trying to undo all of that now. But so organizing is that building a base of people to do a couple of things. One, I often hear in our workshop, people say, well, you're preaching to the choir. And I'm just like, what does that mean? Does that mean that, we all buy this? Because if I went around the room and asked everybody in here, what's your definition of race and racism? Would it be the same? And then everybody gets really quiet, right? They're like, well, don't do that, because we wouldn't have the same one. So it's just like, how we diagnose a problem determines how we treat it. And if I think racism is about individual acts of meanness, which is what I learned first, it's hate and it's bigotry and it's ignorance and it's the Klan. And you teach that racism is a social construct that has been institutionalized in our system, we're not even going to be working on the same thing. So, so organizing is getting clear on that, building a base of people. One, so we're going to get clear on what race and racism is. And then we're going to build a base of power sufficient to challenge existing power. So, so that's how change has happened in this country, through organizing. It hasn't changed because people in power woke up and said, well, it's wrong to oppress people of color. It's wrong to mistreat women. It's wrong to exploit children. It's like, no, those were movement kinds of activity that came from organizing.
Right. Well, Deena, so just thinking about the organizing and that theme and that work there, I think we could make an argument that Dr. King took efforts to organize, to raise attention, to get a shared meaning of issues that were grappling our society. This year's theme for MLK is remaining awake. Remaining awake through a great revolution, and this comes from the title of his 1968 speech at the National Cathedral. So just like a week or so before he was actually assassinated. And from this remaining awake through a great revolution, there were themes that we have identified that are taken from that particular speech. And I just want to hear your thoughts on this as we think about organize, what it will take, how organized it may get to some of these three themes here. So the first one is developing a world perspective. The second is the time to be an anti-racist is now. And then the third one is eliminating poverty. And as we know, when Dr. King was in Memphis, he was advocating on the rights of those who were not being paid a living wage, and the Poor People's Campaign was such a huge aspect of his work, particularly toward his latter part of his life. And so when you think about organizing, can you apply and think about these themes that Dr. King had in his 1968 speech with the organizing concept?
Yeah, sorry, my little puppy, I'll grab him in a minute if he starts barking again. But yeah, so I mean, this idea around, who's valuable and who isn't, these huge differences. Dr. King talked about, he didn't dislike rich people. What he disliked was that often came to the detriment of everyone else. To have so much and other people don't have clean water, don't have adequate shelter, don't have access to healthcare, don't have a place to learn. And so, and to see that was a global condition, that wasn't just something that was happening here. He talked about Calcutta, he talked about Asia, he talked about poor people across the country, and the sort of the moral vision, that he was concerned about, that was not just domestic, but that I was also global in nature. Mm-hmm. This sort of the time to be an anti-racist, Dr. King was not just, just a powerful, inspiring speaker and faith leader. He was an artful organizer. His strategies, we code switch all the time. It's really required in this work We have to pay attention to hear where people are. That's why it's so important to always be in the room where this is being talked about. Hear where people are. What do I know as an anti-racist person that is going to help you talk to them at that place? You know, where if you're a poor white person, where do you see yourself in this arrangement? So at the Racial Equity Institute, we talk about white advantage because there's so many poor and working class white people in this country that privilege just doesn't resonate with them. Not only does it not resonate, it pushes people away from the table and the conversation because they're suffering, they're struggling, life is hard. We say that white people are poor and suffering and struggling, and that's not okay. We also say, and we don't dismiss what I just said, we also say it's not because they're white. That if you're white and poor, there's some insulation and some buffer there so that your outcomes are different than people of color, particularly African Americans in your same socioeconomic class. So we say poor white people aren't poor because they're white, but they are poor because of racism. And I'm not going to explain that here because we've got to stop thinking we can figure this out in a soundbite. You want to figure that out? Go to Dr. Baker's class, come to some of the events on Elon's campus, plug into this movement because it's not something I can tell you. It's not something that you hear. It's something we have to know and understand to be able to talk about that. And so, so being an anti-racist person comes with that framework and that analysis. You know, so where do people fit in this? You know, where are other people of color? You know, what are some of the other questions that come? And so being an anti-racist organizer entails and encompasses all of those different perspectives and views and analysis and frameworks. That's really powerful. And tell me the third one that you were, the third theme.
Yeah, it's related closely to what you just discussed, the eliminating poverty.
Yeah, well, you know, you can't eliminate poverty. You know, it's so interesting that this debate issue priority over poverty or race. And in the United States, you know, poverty, it was poor white people that were really becoming a problem to the establishment, you know, to the aristocracy, to the ruling class, to the planter class, that it was poor white people. And so we had poverty was an issue back in the 1600s, 1500s, 1600s. So we've had to figure out how we deal with that. And race has been one of the wedges that keep poor white people and poor people of color from coming together. And so race and class are so intertwined. You know, Ira Katznelson, who's the author of the book When Affirmative Action Was White, he talks about the relationship between race and class as a Gordian knot. He said, you can't untie one lace and leave the other one intact. And so, so that poverty is an issue. Your socioeconomic class and status, you know, impacts your life. And we know that racial inequity exists along all of those socioeconomic on that continuum. So that white kids who are on free and reduced lunch in our schools have better outcomes than their peers who are in the same socioeconomic class as them. We know that there are racial gaps at the high income level. We know there are racial gaps at the professional level. There are racial gaps at the performance level. So ending poverty is important, but racism will just sort of remake it over and over and over again because of, you know, a 400-year history where 346 years, not only did your race determine your socioeconomic status then, but it determines your socioeconomic status today. Our equity approach isn't, you know, doing things so that going forward, your outcomes won't be determined by race. Our equity approach includes that and says we must go back and capture the depth of the socioeconomic injury. The depth of the institutional injury has to be brought forward and be a part of that equity effort, or the inequity is so glacial that again, it will just remake itself again.
So I have to follow up on a couple of points you made, Deena. One is you said, well, I'm not going to explain that to you right now. And that is one of the things that I see very often is, you know, folks want answers, folks want solutions, and folks want really quick fixes. So can you talk a little bit about that and how do you encourage people through that desire?
Yeah, well, when we think a problem is simple, we think it's an easy solution. When we know something's complex, we don't start there. They say, you know, solution seeking it's not a good strategy for problem solving, especially something so massive and so glacial as this. I was reading an article because I thought, nobody says this about cancer. Cancer is just devastating our lives every day. And no, I just don't hear people talk about it the same way. I don't hear people say, I'm tired of talking, let's take some action. I don't hear people say, when are we gonna, see some results? So I found an article that said, something about, cancer, what's taking so long? And there was a quote by President Taft in 1910. He said, within 5 years, cancer will be removed from the list of fatal maladies. That was like 110 years ago. And so we're still dealing with cancer, but we have respect for that problem. We know that this is complicated. We're learning. We don't know everything. We're willing to race for the cure. We're willing to wear pink in October. We're willing to, just be advocates to raise awareness. And we're not attached to an outcome. We are committed to the process. But we think race is something easy and simple. So you can go to a workshop and tell us what to do. So to me, when people ask that question, because when you understand this in your bones, that's not the question you ask. When you also understand this in your bones, you have more to do than you can implement in your lifetime. You're just, you know the things that need to be done along the way. And so when people ask that question, they have really, to me, mismeasured the problem. Race is a primary indicator of your outcome in life. I'm sorry, while you're asking the next question, I'm going to grab him.
Okay.
We get that. So that just, goes back to a point early in one of your responses. You talked about we not respecting race, the race, the salience of race. And, there's not a simple solution to, it's not an easy solution to this race issue that we confront in our society. And so we have a big, opportunity to address a big issue. I remember being in one of the workshops before. Again, I've been in several of the phase 1 workshops, and I always learn something new, and I feel re-energized by being in there. And the magnitude of what we grapple with racism is, and I understand more and more, is really large. I mean, it's on the scale of this, think about President Taft's prediction that in 5 years, there won't be this cancer issue that we're grappling with. But we respect cancer now. We have so many cancer centers and specialties and so much research and dollars pumped into the study of this, and yet we still haven't yet been able to abate this issue. Similar, we need to have that same level of respect and heartfelt engagement with the issue of racism to help rid that of our society.
Yeah, I listened to, and Dr. Baker has been a part of so much advocacy around health. I think the healthcare has been the area that has made great strides in keeping race on the table. And I was listening to these sort of brilliant scholars, Dr. Michael Bird and Dr. Linda Clayton. They're a married couple, board certified gynecologists that are researchers in public health, and written books that had been nominated for a Pulitzer Prize around the American health dilemma. And I watched a presentation, and they laid out this chronology, this timeline about where health intersects with race. And I thought, you can take health out and put every other institution in there. So this is the chronology of race in the United States and how it intersects with our systems and our institutions. And so the way they lay this out, they look at 400 years. And they say, we have spent, the first chronological period, which was, from 1619, as there's record of Africans arriving in Jamestown, from 1619 to 1865, it's 246 years of chattel slavery. So it's not just forced labor. It's not just torture and abuse and oppression and murder and genocide. We're building a nation. We're building a nation. We are establishing every system, every institution, all of their norms and values and standards and methodologies, all their approaches, all of their ways of doing things. Now, those ways of doing things are coming from the orientation of one group of people. Now, if that's your way of doing things, white, European, Anglo, if that's your way of Western, if that's your way of doing things, so let's say it's not wrong. But what's wrong about it, it's become the way of doing things, not a way of doing things. And now it's been universalized and made racially invisible. And so that has been institutionalized into our society. So that was 2.5 centuries of building a nation, building wealth on the back of free labor, genocide against the first people in this country. So that's 62% of our experience in the United States. So we spent the majority of our time in that worldview. So then let's look forward. We have another 100 years, right? So we have an abolitionist movement that confronted and organized and dealt with that. Then we have another 100 years, 1865 to 1965, give or take a couple of years, another 100 years of Jim Crow that says, okay, you can be a citizen. You're not enslaved, but you have no rights. Can't eat here, can't sleep here, can't drink here, can't be buried here, can't watch the movies here. You can't ride on this road. You can't stay in this hotel. You can't bid on the school project. I found an article in Greensboro from 1912. This Black guy named L.B. Jeffries bid to build a school here, Gate City School. It was a school for white students, and he was awarded the contract by the city, 1912. He didn't get the contract, even though he was awarded the contract. And so they said, well, why didn't he get it? Was he overbid? And it's like, no, the other bids were twice as much as his. And it's like, well, why didn't he get to build a school? Was he not, credentialed? And it's like, nope, he had all the qualifications. And so it's like, well, why didn't he get to build a school? Because he was Black. Mm-hmm. So you couldn't build a school. So guess what? Today, we don't have any Black contractors that can build a school. They can build a school, but they don't meet the criteria to get the contract to build a school. So they always have to be somebody's mentee, even though you have a degree in civil engineering from, the colleges and universities around here, you still get to be mentored. Mm-hmm. So it's not just the young Black males in the community that need a mentor. It's the Black civil engineers that need a mentor. It's the Black faculty members that need a mentor, right? Because they can't get papers published, can't get tenure. So, So we have 300, that was another 25% of our experience in the United States during that Jim Crow. That's like 87% of the United States. I mean, this is like, do the math. This is a no-brainer about how this country was set up. And then that's all been invisible. And then Dr. King said it, Lyndon Johnson said it, it's been said over and over. You can't have that kind of history, set people free or unchain them, and then say you're free to compete. And everyone has an equal opportunity now. And that's what we spent so many years. We went equal opportunity, colorblind, and now we're trying to deconstruct and undo some of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Within all that, I'm sorry, go Stephanie.
No, go ahead.
I was just thinking about with all that you just described in that timeline, that chronology, Deena, I mean, there is a certain amount of trauma and hurt and pain that is experienced not only by those during those time period, but also passed down generationally to others who are now following their ancestors. And so just thinking about the need for racial healing, today, you may be aware that there's a relatively recent recognition the day after Martin Luther King's celebration, the Tuesday after his celebration of his that national holiday here, there is the National Day of Racial Healing. And it's only about 5 years old right now. And it's something by the Kellogg Foundation has spawned this, and it's been promoted by one of our trade association in higher education, Association of American Colleges and Universities. So AAC&U promotes this. And they ask that there's a call to action, a call for organizations to plan programs, to have discussions, to move closer to this concept of racial healing. And when you describe what has happened, 87% of the United States history in there, that's a lot of racial healing to occur, right? And if it's been passed down, this generational trauma that's passed down, transgenerational trauma that's passed down from people to people to people, while contending with the everyday, the contemporary things that are going on, it's quite a task to explore, to combat. So do you have any thoughts about this concept of racial healing, and based on your previous answer?
Do I? So I do. Reconciling is a process. It's not an act. It's not an event. It's not something you make up for in that sense. That there's a process, and at the end of the process is that you have to make people whole again. that you have to help restore people and put them back in their original condition prior to the injury. So healing has to take into account the depth of the damage that has been done. It also has to include from the people who did the damage and the damage that has been done in their name. So you don't get off because you didn't do it. You're tied to stuff that has been done in your name. Things have been done in your name. We say that racism robs white people of their humanity because things have been done in your name. And we have a multiracial movement. We have multiracial organizers, and we work together with this understanding. I remember at one of our joint caucus meetings, we have a white caucus where white people spend time having this conversation about what's been done in their name, what that means to them, and their other work. And then we have a people of color caucus where we can talk without interruption and without explanation about how we deal with this, how have we internalized this caste assignment, this caste status that Isabel Wilkerson so brilliantly, conveys, what that means and how we internalize that and how we act out of that and how that shows up. And then we come together and we try to work together knowing that all that stuff is at the table. And I remember telling our white colleagues, how difficult it was for me to watch The Butler or 12 Years a Slave. It just, it just ignites that multi-generational anger and pain and sadness. And I realized one time it was my duty to watch that. It was, there's a saying, the way out is back through, that Pastor Johnny Ray Youngblood, he was at the St. Paul Community Baptist Church in Brooklyn, New York, coined that term, the way out is back through. So we have to go back and capture a culture that was our agency, that was life-giving. We also have to go back through and understand what happened to that to get out of it. So denying it, repressing the memory, that stuff just keeps trying to come up. And so, so I was telling my white colleagues, because they were just saying, that just pains me so much too. I just can't watch it. And I said, well, you have to watch it too, but for another reason. Because I don't want you to watch it because you're angry at them or that, you feel bad for what happened during that time. But you have to get in touch with what's been done in your name. And you should be broken about that, you reaching that place where it feels inconsolable. Brian Stevenson and so many others talking about being broken, and allowing ourselves to be broken. I think if white people don't allow themselves to be broken, then it is hard to bring that authenticity to the work. It can be very paternalistic. And we hear that because white people have somehow become allies to Black people when racism is their problem. It's like, how'd that happen? You guys created racism. It was created for white people, by white people, and you're going to be our allies? So it's just like, nope, we're going to give this racism problem back to you, and we're going to be your allies. How can we help you? Right? And so, it's that healing is important, but it is incomplete without those steps. And without the goal of restoring people to their original condition as though the injury never occurred. Isn't that what the courts say? We have to make people whole again, right? Well, we have to do that in this work too.
Deena, say a little more about organizing in multiracial spaces, because it is different work, right? And the nature of those interactions influences and impacts our progress forward. One of the things I remember very clearly for maybe the first time that I went to a training was the importance of commitment to the work, right? Like we don't need people who are here today and gone tomorrow, and that we should expect conflict and challenge and failure, in this movement. So can you talk a little bit about those things, about working in multiracial groups, and then also just the need for that steadfast commitment?
Yeah, and so I have a sort of multiple pronged idea about this. One is that our co-founder, Suzanne Plissick, who I love dearly, We call her the Oracle, the white Oracle, because all of my white friends that want to ask me a lot of questions, I'm like, nope, you got to go talk to Suzanne. I got to be freed up to work with Black people. And so, so white people need leaders too, right? White people need mentors. Where is their place in the movement? One of our colleagues, Maria Reynat Pumarejo, in Puerto Rico, she's an anti-racist trainer and organizer and activist, but she talks about everyone needing to take their rightful place in this movement. And so, ending racism is good for everyone, and I know that because the narrative is so powerful, the narrative of whiteness is so powerful and dangerous, that it's more powerful than the quality of your own life, that your life will be better if we end racism. But it's just like, if that means giving up my identity, then some people would rather die. Some people would risk, would die for that. So white people need mentors and leaders in this work too. And our colleagues, we all work together, guided by some principles. I thought the work was getting in the work. I thought the job was, it's like we get people in the movement. And then I found out it's like, oh, it's tough in here, because all our stuff comes up, right? I had these two young white girls, they're in college now, and they called me. They went to one of our high schools here in Guilford County, and they said, it's wrong that I didn't learn about Zora Neale Hurston until I was a senior, and we should have more feminist authors and more authors of color and more textbooks and a more integrated curriculum. And so they started a petition around what they were learning in school. And I said, I want to invite you to a meeting. I want you to meet some white people. They have some scars. They have some what do you call the calluses from doing this work. Because when you get inside, that's when all this stuff shows up. And we have a saying, Suzanne says this: you hurt who you can reach.
Yeah.
And so because we are so far from power, when we get together in our meetings, we just start calling people out. And I'm like, wait a minute, it took us a long time to get these white people right. I don't need you to come in here and, we're honest, we're honest in here, but these are people that want to be here. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to get things wrong. But we got to figure this out. So one is that we work guided by some principles, supporting leadership of color, taking leadership from people of color, working in accountable relationships with people of color, practicing something that's so countercultural, believing what people of color are saying. And so this is where we practice. This is where we do that. This is where we model how to change this hierarchy, this racial stratification, this racial hierarchy around, whose voice is important, who's smart, who's intelligent, who's a leader. So we practice that in our work. So that's one part of it that I love and that we do. The other thing is, Suzanne will be the first one to tell you, do not put all your eggs in our basket. So what's the plan, Black folks? What's the plan B? So we've started this, community rebuilding effort where it's just like, there's some amazing things that we can do. I watched The Banker the other night. I'm like, where are our grocery stores and our insurance companies? That's what Dr. King was talking about the burning building. It was just like, we had these things. And so when we got into into this society, then we also, it compromised our own agency and our ability to support each other and trade and do business and for the dollar to circulate in our community. So we're working in this sort of multiracial side. And we're also saying we have to have a plan and we have to have some direction. We have to have a vision for our own community and not to be separatist, but to be independent and to be empowered to be able to make something happen. A community where our kids are safe, a community where our kids go to the neighborhood school and we contribute to making it strong and good. A neighborhood where, if somebody needs a dollar or a ride or all the things that we used to do, we have blueprints for that. Collier Heights in Atlanta, Hayti right there, Hayti in Durham, Warnersville in Greensboro. It's like, Wilmington, North Carolina, we can do this. So we're just simultaneously, well, if this doesn't work, we got a backup plan.
Yeah.
Earlier, you referenced Brian Stevenson, whom we had as one of our guest speakers on campus during our common reading, Just Mercy, a few years ago. And Mr. Stevenson talked about, 4 steps toward this justice and equity. And one of those was to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, essentially. And I imagine some of the conversation that we're having tonight, there might be some people tuning in who may be a little unsettled by some of the concepts and some of the language that we're using. And I imagine you encounter this quite a bit in your work and your passion, Deena, and your organizing work as well. What might you offer to those who are just, they're interested, but this is just really uncomfortable for them. They're interested, they want to get in, but they don't know if they can handle this. So you have any thoughts, any response to that type of scenario?
Yeah, our body doesn't like, I mean, we just have, whether it's you're working out and trying to be well, I describe this work as like a, like a detox crisis, right? So one of Maria, the friend I was telling you about earlier, she got me juicing and I was doing wheatgrass shots. I was just like hardcore. I just went for it. And in 2 days I'm cramping, right? I'm sick. I don't feel well. I'm tired. I'm like, I think I should go back to eating like burgers and stuff because this is something wrong with this. And she said, no, what's wrong with it wasn't 2 days, it was longer than that. But she said, what's happening is that your body is, the things that you're doing are extracting all the toxins that you've become comfortable with. You've become comfortable being sluggish. You've become comfortable being kind of fatigued. It's normal for you. And so that, it's going to get worse before it gets better, this chaos to community. And so, so we describe that as that if you're not willing to push through that, to go through that, it's a birthing kind of thing that it's, it is difficult and painful, but being Black is difficult and painful, and so, so this willingness to be uncomfortable, it also gives us an opportunity to say, I can do this. We're so conflict averse, we're risk averse, we turn away from problems that we feel overwhelmed by. And I'm afraid that we're losing the sort of I talk about this all the time. I think, your brain does that pruning, when it's not engaged in problem solving activities, when it's not, building that kind of neural muscle, then it starts to just kind of prune, like, you're getting rid of all the dead things that you haven't used. And I think we're going to lose the capacity to be able to solve complex problems if we can't face and confront some of these things. And so it's just a part of the work. We don't stay there. We don't stay in discomfort. We don't stay in shame or guilt or anger. It's not healthy. But it is part of the process, that we just have to be, willing to sit in the ambiguity of this. We have to be, and the part of the, I think, struggle with the discomfort is the fix it again. I think that's the biggest problem. I want it fixed. And if it can't be fixed, that's most people's discomfort.
Yeah.
But when you understand the scale and scope of the problem, that the intervention, we said, must be seismic. So that's a place to start. It's like, okay, what's a seismic intervention look like? And so, so it's just a part of it. It's not the thing of it, it's not the major part of it. It's just a part of it. It's like parenting, your kids, go through these phases, they're, it's uncomfortable when they're 7, right? It's uncomfortable again when they're 14. It's uncomfortable, it's life. So, so yeah, I just think we have to be willing, we have to detach from solutions. We have to be willing to be a part of the movement, of the process of, Maria's partner, Raul, Dr. Quinones Rosado, he says, this is developmental.
Yeah.
And it's one of the, the best things that I've ever done. Is it tough? Absolutely. But it's some of the hardest work I've ever done, but it's the most life-giving work that I've ever done.
Can you, so much of that resonates with me as well. And one of the things that we've talked about often is the historical nature of movements, right? And the different phases of movements. And I remember you were on a webinar and you pulled out you called them receipts. You were talking about, organizing in the school system, and you pulled out, some minutes Handwritten, I'm sure, because there were some old receipts from a meeting, you know, where you said the agenda basically was the same decades ago as it is now. So can you talk a little bit about the phases of the movement and the call to not do the things that we were doing before?
Yeah, talk about being uncomfortable. That particular webinar, Dr. Baker, was about call out culture. And it was, we had some of our young leaders here, you know, that push us into accountability, that disagree on approaches, that have struggled through community meetings, that have unfriended each other, you know, unfollowed each other, blocked each other, you know, because of our approach in this work. And that's part of this discomfort that we have to just be willing to, you know, we step back for a minute, we come back together. It's like, we got to get back in here and figure this thing out.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I am so grateful for the movement phases. I'm so grateful I got this end of it, you know, because the, you know, abolitionist, the slavery, you know, period, and Jim Crow. And, you know, that's why I have to watch those movies and read those books and listen to those stories. Because I have to know what people did, what they took on, what they were willing to do, the sacrifices that they made. And I'm grateful for that. And we're building on that. They sent us here, you know, they sent us inside of these systems and the institutions. They did things so that we could be here to do the work in this, you know, in this century, in the time that we're here. And so out of respect for them, you know, it's like, I didn't start the movement, you know, that it's just, this is my time, and this is where it is. This is the phase of it that we're in. So the abolitionist movement, civil rights movement, Black Power movement, women's movement, you know, Black Lives Matter movement, anti-racism movement, that it is a continuum of organizing activity and movement-minded activity, movement-minded people working together. And so, you know, it's not what we call the oppression Olympics, or it's not, you know, who started the movement and who's down and who's in the streets and who's, you know, and all of that stuff. It's just like, you know, it needs all of us. And we got to figure that out, because I know a lot of people, especially because our young organizers and their energy, you know, it was a struggle because we had this clash of cultural approaches to movements. And this was happening across the country. And so we're trying to figure out, what do we do, you know? One of the other things that was going on is you heard who you can reach. And so we were putting a lot of energy into hurting each other and not dealing with, it's not that we didn't need to deal with some of our differences and some of our approaches and some agreements. What do they call it? Terms of engagement, you know, how we were going to kind of work together, respect each other's approaches and doing those kinds of things. So so that's all part of the work. It's like SNCC and the SCLC,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So that's what we're saying is that this isn't new. This is just movement complexities, right? They've gone through this, you know. It was just like, you know, I keep Harriet Tubman back here. They said, you know, she freed thousands of slaves. She could have freed thousands more if they knew they were slaves. So she was putting guns to Black people's heads then. So it's like, this ain't new, you know. And that's why the way out is back through, is that this is movement activity. This is just what it looks like in the 21st century.
Right.
So yeah, you know, we're not throwing anybody away, and we're just willing to struggle with each other, and we're going to figure our way out of this thing, because we need each other. You know, Black men are dying, Black doctor professors are dying, and so you know, it's all across the spectrum.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit more about the movement building piece? Because we've often shared about how important it is to be accountable to somebody in this work. And so talk a little bit about accountability, but also bring in the 20th century view of organizing, because now we're organizing in institutions, and you all are increasingly working with some big institutions to address racial equity.
Yeah, so we're community and institutional organizers, and that is that the way in which we bring community organizing skills inside of the work that we're doing. You know, 40 years ago or 50 years ago, you know, they used to look at the movement as sort of an outside job, people on the outside pushing systems into accountability and access. And now people are inside, and so now we have to organize inside, because we have a view and a perspective of what things look like there. And we value both of those. We need judges to be organizers. We need police chiefs to be organizers. We need superintendents to be organizers. We need mayors to be organizers. And that is, again, building bases of power sufficient to challenge the current power, the power that is controlling, the power that is exploiting, the power that is oppressing. So that doesn't stop you from doing that, being an organizer, having legitimacy because you have some credentials. It means that you take this work wherever it is that you go. I think about, I have this funny feeling, this sort of awkwardness about leadership. I don't think you should make yourself a leader, that you decide you're going to run for office or you decide you're going to lead something. Because who are you accountable to? I'm accountable to myself because I started this and I know what the mission and vision is. I think when people select you because of your work and because of your relationship and because of your sustainability, your commitment to that, then that accountability is important because you need people. You need people to get your back. You need people to pull your coattails. To say, hey, I need to check in with you about this position you took or this thing that you said. And so accountability is so important. We have to, and part of my job as an elected official, part of my job as a community organizer is to help restore the agency that has been stripped and, just generationally taken from my community to hold me accountable. When you know and feel like you're doing the right thing, then you want to be accountable because that accountability feels right. And so part of my job, because I get reelected over and over again, and a lot of times we don't have to do a lot for that to happen. So I could say people love me. I could also say that I haven't done a lot to help people see the things they need to assess me on. So that's part of my job too, is to talk about that accountability. It's like, look, what do you want me to do? You want SROs in schools, you want them out. You want the curriculum infused, you don't. So this isn't something I should decide. This is something that I am in relationship with the community about, and we work together on that. So I've got to be connected to somebody, or I could just be a loose cannon, So accountability, with position without accountability is compromising for both the organizer and the constituency. And so they need to operate in tandem.
That's true. And we're seeing the organizing butt up against some Fortune 500 companies and calling them to account and to take more action. So what are you seeing happening in that space?
Well, I think that the reason we saw private sector leaders, police chiefs, news analysts, other unusual suspects, I'll say, that you don't normally see, but that we're making these pledges and commitments and statements of solidarity and investment is because of the effectiveness of the movement. It wasn't because of again, this awareness, this awakening, this consciousness that's been there. It is that as organizers, we create an environment under which that change can happen. And I think the organizing that has been going on for so many years now, Black Lives Matter from 2013, other movements, that civil rights movement that is have been going on, it is the converging and it is the merging of those movements that that led to people making those commitments and also committing to learning. It's just like, I want to learn. I want my organization to learn. I'm listening to my frontline workers. I'm, that I know that, that people are trying to sort out and figure out how to come to work and how to deal with that. And they're afraid for their children and, and they can't take time off and they don't have access to healthcare. But I think that was movement minded activity. That wasn't something that came from, the leadership of people in power. And so I'm just really inspired by that. Now, we don't stop, with what's going on, that this is ongoing.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that, Deena, and considering that you mentioned movement. Hasn't been happening just recently. There have been things happening for a long time. You have Harriet Tubman in the background there, and so part of the movement. And at different stages of history, movements have been occurring. And of course, Dr. King was a part of a movement as well. And during that time though, Dr. King, wasn't well liked when he was alive, particularly toward the end of his life. His approval rating in 1966 was only 33%. And just to give context, I checked yesterday, and President Trump's approval rating is actually higher than Dr. King was in 1966 for some of the things that he was speaking about. You have been able somehow to gain approval for what you're doing, as discomforting as it might be to some. Earlier, before we got on this broadcast here, you were sharing how you've been invited to spaces, not just across the country, but the world: Bolivia, Israel, Egypt. You've been in multiple places in a relatively short period of time. Mm-hmm. And the power of technology, the presence of technology has allowed for this movement to continue and for have more people to be reached. So I just wonder, you have any predictions or projections as to how we might leverage this technology even further? We're gathered from multiple places at this very moment in this virtual space right now to continue this movement. So what could you offer or project that we will continue leveraging technology in a movement?
Yeah, so I'll just say two things to that, Dr. Williams. One is I'm a community organizer, and I just want to say that first. I'm not a professional consultant or facilitator, that my analysis is executed through my organizing, that this isn't an academic or intellectual thing where the Racial Equity Institute does not solicit work. We're all word of mouth. And that is the power of this analysis that we didn't put together. I didn't create this brilliant, scholarly history of how we got here. It is A. Leon Higginbotham. It is just Ibram Kendi. It is Du Bois. It is so many people that have been putting this together. What the Racial Equity Institute does is take that brilliant work and organize it, right? We said an organized lie is more powerful than a disorganized truth. So I'm a community organizer that is taking the sort of brilliant work of people, putting it together in ways that really resonate with people. But it was Dr. King, and it was Stokely Carmichael, and it was James Baldwin, and it was Audre Lorde, and it was so many people that were saying this. They said it to this, like a volleyball game, right? We're spiking right now, but they set everything up. And so this is not about the Racial Equity Institute or me or any of our sort of contemporary leaders. I mean, I'm in awe of the brilliance of people here, but people have been putting us in this position for a very long time. And that's what organizing does. And so what we have to do is that we have to do the things we say, that we organize, we create an environment under which change can happen. That's what we have to do now. This isn't about what I can make happen right now. It is how I am working in ways that are creating an environment where the change can happen for the future generations. And we've got technology that's available to us. We've got ways that people mobilize and organize. We have information, we have analysis, we have these frameworks and approaches that are so effective today. And so I just want to say, kudos to Dr. King and Harriet Tubman. And I hope that they're seeing the fruit of their labor. This is really the fruit of their labor, Randy, not mine, not ours.
Right.
I'm just glad that we get to kind of, that we get to carry the ball from here.
Yeah. Well, I know we're coming toward the end of time here, and we've been posing and throwing questions out to you, Deena. And so that's sort of been guiding the conversation. But in this next couple minutes here, would you share what you would like for the audience to hear, this Elon University community, both internally and externally, to know on this occasion to celebrate Dr. King's life, to think about the movement that is continuing on and how you're playing a role in, and how we might play a role in this. But what is it that you would like to leave the audience as some parting words?
Well, I would like to offer, and this is for this university, for all universities, for all corporations, for all organizations, that the speakers, the people, the events and the activities, that your actions have to be proportionate to the advice of the people that you've had there. So you can't bring Brian Stevenson in, you can't bring Isabel Wilkerson, Michelle Alexander, Ibram Kendi, and then your actions are not proportionate to their advice. So be careful who you invite. I think when we're talking about that accountability, that your action should be proportionate to the advice that has been given by the people that you bring, or it can be exploitive, that it could be misleading. And so we want to be authentic in this work. And so before we look at the Speakers Bureau, then we need to say, what have we done with the advice that we got last year? And if we haven't done anything with that, then we have to be willing to be uncomfortable with not having the celebrations and the traditions, and to get busy doing the work. So that's what I would like to offer to whoever's listening.
Absolutely. Well, that's great. Spoken like a true organizer. It just radiates from you. I really appreciate those wise words. And I know there are many students who are listening, colleagues as well, alumni too, even parents who are tuned into this. And so your reach has landed on the ears of several people, ears and hearts, I hope, of several people. So we're grateful for you joining us this evening for the MLK celebration event. And we're always going to have open arms for you and your REI colleagues and other organizers with whom you work with to help us to be organizers as well, to have that type of mindset from our frame of reference here in higher education. So we're grateful again to have you, Deena. Stephanie, always a delight to be in your space as well and to have you a part of this conversation. And we look forward to the rest of the community who's tuning in this evening to be on the lookout for other MLK programs that are occurring over the next couple of weeks. And so with that, we will conclude this evening's program, and we're grateful that you have joined us.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thanks.